Welcome to the pilot video for the workshop What Makes Music Tick. Uh, this is a workshop that was done at McEwan University in Edmonton, Canada, a couple of times over the last 4 years, and we thought we would do it again with more global exposure, which is why this is coming on YouTube. I'm Reinhard von Berg, and I conducted this workshop. I have been teaching at McEwan University for many years. I'm a composer. I've been a church organist and a music teacher. And I have studied music in Canada, in Germany, in California. And I think I like to feel that I bring to this examination of music the point of view of a person who actually has tried his hand at writing his own music, which is a different perspective I think. This will start at some point in the future. So I'm saying that anybody that is interested in following up with the series of workshops that is going to be offered, go to the link below and you'll get in touch with me, and I will organize it and do the scheduling, and you will know, and you'll get a link to register for the workshop with McEwan University. So basically, I need to be in touch with people who actively want to participate. I could, of course, do this whole thing as a series of YouTube videos, but I like the idea of the participants being able to ask questions and interact, which is what we'll be doing today with a small pilot audience. That's sort of the basic. Let me just get my notes here. Introductory remark I need to make. So let's start with asking our two participants. When I announced a workshop on what makes music tick, what were your expectations? Can we start with Nayar?
Yeah, sure. It's nice to be here. Hello, everybody. Well, I guess I have a little bit of experience with you, Reinhard, because I'm taking the other course, Wagner's Ring. And it's a very interesting course. And even though it's theoretically is quite advanced for someone like me who doesn't have any formal music studies, I find that I can extract so much valuable information from the course, either things that are related to, well, I guess in particular the composition, also the interplay between composition and music and notes and different things like that. So I thought that something like what makes music tick would be something that would be more appropriate for somebody with my background. And one of the things in particular that in your description of the course that I found very interesting is thinking about time in music. So that's something that I don't know that much about. It's especially from a formal perspective, I find the time aspect to be quite complicated. So I'm very interested in aspects of improvisation and composition, rhythm. So that's what I'm looking to get from this course.
Okay. Nayar, I'd like to address some of the points you made before we move on. One of the things I think I can offer in this workshop, in the Wagner workshop, and we'll also be offering again another one on improvisation. And in all of them, was most obviously in the one in improvisation, I'm trying to look at it through the eyes of the person who created the music. I'm trying to, I think I have the ability to see what the possibilities were that went through the composer's head when before he wrote it down. And in some cases, I will demonstrate myself on the piano what I think some of those possibilities are. And I've actually written things like that. I've alternate universe versions of famous pieces. It's great fun to do that. But that's a different workshop. That would be the improvisation one. As far as you were saying about not having all the training. This workshop initially won't even use notation. What we are talking about is analysis. What makes music tick? It's like my grandson, when he was 2 years old, you gave him a toy. He wasn't really interested in playing with that toy. He wanted to know how the toy worked. He wanted to know if you could take it apart. He already then had that kind of a mind. So it's that sort of attitude. But typically when you take theory or analysis courses, even at university level, mostly they're about harmony. And I know, Nair, that you're interested in that. And we will possibly touch on that, but not initially. Because that's not the most basic aspect of music. After all, the music from virtually the entire world, other than Europe, never had any harmony. And we can look at melody. We can look at orchestration. If it's a song, definitely we can look at the words. We can analyze poetry, poetic structure, rhyme structure, metric structure in the poetry. And we'll be doing all those things. But time is most central. And that brings me to, I think, my introductory remarks here. My objective in this workshop is to find ways of experiencing music as a whole, all at once. And I'm going to quote from a letter that a friend of Mozart's wrote to his friend, depicting a visit at Mozart's apartment in Vienna. And he describes how he knocked on the door, walked in, and there's Mozart sitting at the table with a big goose feather in his hand, writing notes. And the guy looks over Mozart's shoulder for a while and says, "Gee, do you hear all those notes that you're writing?" And Mozart, in a very annoyed tone of voice, said, yeah, of course I hear what I'm writing, but I don't hear it the way you hear it. When you hear a piece of music, you hear first the first note, then you hear the second note, then you hear the third note, and so on until you get to the last note. And then when it's all over, you'll probably forget most of it. But I hear all the notes at once. I hear the whole thing at once. So how was Mozart able to do that? Well, we don't have Mozart's brain, but we can try to approach that sort of a way of hearing it. And you will see tonight even a way of doing that. And the best way to get there is via analyzing the temporal aspect of music. Because that's the most basic thing. It's been said, if I go, anybody recognize that tune? Well, that was O Canada. But if I were to play it with the wrong rhythm, you probably wouldn't recognize it at first. Or if I did what the chorale prelude does, and did a say. Now on the piano I can bring it out, and you're familiar with the tune. And I told her this is what I'm playing, but I have played plenty of chorale preludes in church where I'm sure nobody understood that I was playing the tune that they had just finished singing. But the rhythm is the most basic thing. Um, and you know, when music started, maybe 100,000 years ago in Africa, well, we were singing and dancing, weren't we? But you have to ask yourself, what's more basic, dancing or singing? And I think dancing probably was. I think you can see chimpanzees dancing. Okay, so that's the most basic thing. That's kind of what I wanted to say. Elgar, what would your expectations be?
Well, um, I suppose there's always a bit of a mystery behind music, and so I guess the title "What Makes Music Tick" is sort of to try and get some understanding of why things, what is music, really at its most basic level, and to try and understand that.
Okay. I would add to what you said. One thing I want to get to, in the past iterations of this workshop, I kept promising people I would get to the point of explaining to them not what makes America great again, but what makes great music great. Um, what's the difference between a boring piece and that kind of thing? And what I can tell you right now, uh, the skill of a good composer is to find this fine line, the balance between too much predictability, which means you tune out, you know what's going to happen anyhow. You don't need to wait for the end. And too much unpredictability where you're just bewildered. You got to raise expectations, fill some of them, but not fill others. But it also occurred to me, just getting ready for this pilot, that what we'll be looking at initially will be songs. And songs are what I would call closed forms. You only have to hear half the song, you know how long it's going to be. You'll see that. You hear only 3 or 4 notes, you know what key you're in. You hear 3 or 4 or 5 notes, you know what the time signature is. A good song will have a bit of a punchline at the end with a surprise, and it will have a climax. But it's a closed form. When it's finished, it's finished. And at some point later on in this workshop, I'd like to show what I would call open forms, which is basically sonata form in classical music. And well, the example that always occurs to me is the opening of the Eroica Symphony. And just where you think it's going to have a nice little tune, he steers off in a different direction. And he never, ever in that whole first movement gives you the ending that you're expecting. The very first time I heard it as a teenager, I found it very frustrating to listen to. I mean, what would you expect? Finished. Yeah, but he never does anything like that. He always breaks it out, leaves it unfinished. And that's what you have to do to justify a composition that's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 minutes long. But that's getting way ahead of the game. Let me just check my notes. So unless you have other questions, Elgar and I remember to mute so that what I'm showing here will show on the full screen. Yeah, actually, to continue with this idea of hearing everything at once, you'll see when I have some examples on the share screen, you'll see. But you can imagine, the first song we're looking at has 4 lines. You can imagine writing those lines on transparent plastic, cutting it into 4 sheets of plastic, laying them one on top of the other. You can see right through all of them and see them all at once. That is a little bit like what went on in Mozart's mind. He would have a sonata movement that he's writing out there with his goose feather, and 5 minutes into the piece, the beginning comes back. And not only does he remember exactly what he did at the very beginning, but he'll compare what he's doing now. You say, okay, are we going to copy? How much of it are we going to copy? He's not going to copy all of the beginning because then the piece would never end. He's going to deviate from what he did the first time around to enable him to end the piece. And that's where it gets actually interesting, which is something we never really got around to looking at. But it's sort of like telescoping the piece, folding it over and folding it over, folding it over itself, like DNA, eh? Yeah, DNA folds over and over and over itself, and this molecule that's incredibly long fits inside one of our cells. One aspect of what makes music tick is organic unity. That there are structures, the structures you observe on one size level repeats itself on all size levels. You find this in music, you find this in nature. You'll see in a minute how this happens in the 2 songs that we're going to look at. But in nature, you'll see it too. I've known for quite a few years that plants, trees most noticeably, have 2 habits of branching: alternate and opposite. And I think that's it's pretty obvious. One branch goes off to the right, then another one goes to the left, to the right, to the left. Yeah. Or if one goes off to the right, another one goes off to the left, right opposite it. And you see that right down to the leaf and the veins inside the leaf. At the very smallest levels, it breaks down. If you look at the side veins, from the side veins, you might not see it. I've never even tried that. And on the largest levels, it breaks down. You can see a large tree trying to do opposite branching and not quite succeeding. Not succeeding in being symmetrical. It's trying, but it fails. So typical alternate branches are poplars and ashes. No? Elms. The elm trees that we have branch like that. Typical opposite branching is maples and ash. And there's many others. Okay. So, and the same thing can be observed in nature, for example, in crystals. I think I learned in high school, sugar crystals are hexagonal, salt crystals are square. And if you look at the chemical formula, by the way, diamonds are also basically square, because carbon, which is what a diamond is pure carbon, has a valence of 4, which means 4 electrons missing from the outermost ring. Sugar's first chemical formula is C6 and then some hydrogen and some oxygen. Salt, well, it's not 6, it's NaCl, and then the sodium, I think, has a valence of 2. Doesn't matter, I'm not really a chemist, but you'll see this then. And quartz is the same thing, it's hexagonal. Silicon has a valence of 6. And you'll see quartz crystals, microscopic quartz signals in rocks. You need a microscope to see them, they're hexagonal. You'll see huge crystals sometimes, huge diamonds, and they're either hexagonal or square or something like that. And all the sizes in between. Quite analogous to what the trees are doing. So now we're going to see how this works in music. No, before we do that, and I'm going to stop the share because I wanted to do a bit of a preview of what has happened in previous workshops and what we might do in this one. So I'm just, we went ahead before we did, started off with very familiar songs, which you're going to see in a minute, and mostly folk material. We looked at historical styles of folk material, and maybe we'll even look at international world music styles if we get around to it. Comparing them above all for how regularity versus irregularity. And that's another thing that the composer has to balance, is too much regularity gets boring, too much irregularity is bewildering.
Reinhard, can I interrupt for a
Yeah.
second? So when you say regularity, is that different from what you said earlier when you talked about predictability? Or is that still the
It's
same?
similar. It's similar.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so and so I'm just trying to give you a bit of preview or a post view of what we had done in the past. We would look, I've been a church organist for decades, and you find that when you look at the hymns that come from quite long ago, from the medieval times or from the Renaissance and the very early Baroque, they work with symmetry and asymmetry in a much more free way than later on. Everything became much more constrained later on. And more predictable and more easy to remember and easy to sing. And what makes popular music popular is, to some extent, its predictability. And we moved on. We did. We even looked at some Gregorian chant. I remember we looked. Then we started looking at some interesting music. We did some analyses of this sort with a Schubert song. We did quite intensively. We did Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, which I'm going to show you in a minute. We moved on to Debussy. We looked at L'après-midi d'une faune, the afternoon of a faun, and other pieces by Debussy. And that's about as far as we got, but we could move on. The Wagner group actually was it that asked me to analyze Schoenberg for them, and I did, and I'll show you an example of that. And it'll depend on who's the participants in this workshop, how difficult the music can be that we can look at. But I can do meaningful things with very simple folk songs, or with things like Schoenberg. But here, just as an example, I want to hold up an example of what I did with the Moonlight Sonata. That's where it starts. Yeah. Is that the right way around? Yes. So you see the musical example at the bottom. Both above and below the notated example, you see all these up bow and down bow signs and some numbers. I'm doing a metrical analysis there and comparing upbeats and downbeats, strong beats and weak beats, grouping them in twos or in fours. The colors are a Schenkerian analysis of the notes that are being used, which show up both melodically and harmonically. And then at the top, I can't see it very well here, maybe you can see it. You'll see, you see some colored notes, which are drawn out of the actual notation. And I'll tell you in a minute what a Schenkerian analysis is. But yeah, Well, I'll tell you right now. A Schenkerian analysis is where it can be done. It's most typically done with melody, and it takes what are the most important notes in a melody and ignores the others. And then with that most important notes, you take the most important ones until you've boiled down a whole song to just a 5-note scale or something like that. Oh Canada just went through my head. If we just take the high notes, ya, ya, yeah, and that time we've gone up 3 notes of the scale, from G up to B. That's a very simple example of Schenkerian analysis. And that's sort of what ties a song together. We won't be doing that in detail today. Just as an example of what we did in the Wagner group with Schoenberg, I'll show you this. And each color represents a different 12-tone row. It looks terrible on my thumbnail, but I think it looks better when you see it. And then down below, I write out the tone, 12-tone row. Yeah, at the bottom. And then you can see those notes appearing in the actual composition. That's just an example there. Let us actually go back to the screen share and look at the first song. And we want to be on desktop too. And we want to share. And we want to put in this. There, I trust you can see that now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we've looked at the trees already. Let's move on. So the first song, okay. I am going to actually sing it and play it just so you can hear it. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. And so on. Okay, here's a little test for you guys. You might have to stop your unmute yourself to answer the question. I'll sing the last, with no accompaniment, the last 2 lines, and I'll make a typical mistake that many students make. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Let me try that again. Yeah. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. No. How much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. It's actually very hard to do that because it's so illogical. But I've had students do that. Well, I think, is it obvious what I did wrong?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
obvious.
The
You
long
need
notes
to
I
take a
didn't
breath.
have enough. And basically, students, if you don't keep them busy doing something on the long notes, they just skip on to the next note. They don't care. Most students are unmusical enough that the lack of symmetry then doesn't bother them. Okay, back to what we have here. To understand the metrical structure of music, your best bet is to learn to count with your fingers. Can you get you to mute so that you can see, or wait a minute, how do we do this? Um, you can't see me, can you?
Yeah, I can see you. You're in a little window. Your window's small.
Yeah, okay, I can see you, but I can't see myself. Well, as long as you can see me. Can you see my fingers? Wait,
Yes.
wait, I gotta change this so I can see myself. Um, so I can see myself at least now. Okay. When I say count with your fingers, I'm suggesting don't use your thumb. Use your fingers. Now, violinists, this is the first finger and this is the fourth finger. You can do that if you like. I prefer the other way around, make the pinky the first fingers. And you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, tapping a table or something. And you can experiment with that and count with your fingers at all kinds of magnitudes in all kinds of music. And if it's a nice folk song like this, you won't have a hard time doing it. If it's, say, a sonata movement by Beethoven, you will lose it on the larger sizes. But okay, the fastest notes that are notated in You Are My Sunshine are the quarter notes. Those are quarter notes. But I could imagine a fussy accompaniment, which you get a lot in pop music. You are my sunshine. Okay. And you can actually count 4 fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. I can do the counting with my left hand on the piano. Or you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Okay. Now the question in any counting with your fingers is, on which finger does the tune start? That's a very important thing. It's what characterizes a melody, a style, a dance style, is on which count does it start. So when I'm doing that, I'll do very slowly. You are my sunshine. You are my sun. What finger am I starting on?
On the ring finger.
Well, on which of those 4 eighth notes am I starting on? The first, second, third, or fourth?
It's the second one.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, it is. No, it's not. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So, do, mi, so, Do, mi, so. I'm starting on so, which is the third of those eighth note counts.
Okay.
It's going pretty fast. But it is. It's starting on the third count at that level. But that's kind of artificial because in an ordinary arrangement of the song, you wouldn't have any eighth notes. So if I do quarter notes, you are my sunshine. It's pretty clear that I'm starting on the second note. On the second count.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was thinking. I was counting in 4s.
Yeah, because what I did when I did the eighth note, it's not visible here. I didn't bother with it. I'm just doing it in my head now. But if you do the quarter notes, you're starting on the second count, and that characterizes this tune. And the student making the mistake at the end makes the mistake of starting that phrase also on the second count. Because they think, well, if it's a pop song, all the lines are going to do the same thing, so it also has to start on the second count. Now, So to start on the first count would not make much sense, would it? That would put accents in the middle of the long notes. Would make no sense whatsoever. I always say in this workshop the magic number is 4. I could say the magic number is 2 because 4 is just 2 plus 2. And what I've done here is I've analyzed it on the level of the quarter notes and then on the level of the whole notes. That's these larger numbers. I did not do the half notes. And actually, if I do the eighth notes below the quarter notes, that's not fair. I should be doing the 16th notes. And I think we might find that it would start. I don't even want to think about that now. That's too artificial. But notice the organic unity. At the level of the quarter notes, we're starting on the second count. At the level of the whole notes, we'll have to look at the, Okay, so when you're just looking at the words, it's pretty obvious that the word sunshine, both time it happens, is the most important word and is the most important accent. So when you have the 4/4 time counts here, this downbeat is more important than this one. And this one is less important than this one. But the two important downbeats, this one and this one, which is more important, that's a little difficult to answer. And I actually did both of them. Making this the most important one is the red numbers. Making this the most important one is the black numbers. Because when you're counting, 1 is the most important count. Every music student learns that. So you have to ask yourself, is it, you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Or is it more convincing to do this? You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. And, well, what's your vote? Which one sounds more convincing?
Honestly, I couldn't really tell.
I'll go for the second myself, but
I would too.
the
I
other
made it
one
pretty
seemed
obvious.
seemed very forced, seemed very
Well, I was
or off
exaggerating.
foot.
I was exaggerating and making it really super obvious. A good performance isn't that obvious. But see, music has a structure underlying it, and you pin onto that structure the actual music. The structure may be unambiguous, but the music itself can be ambiguous. But when you come on the first line, it's pretty hard to decide. There's nothing really, you are my sunshine, You could argue this one is a higher note than this one. You are my da 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 da, so that this one should be less important. So it's hard to decide. Here, da 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 da. You get actually in all musical phrases a tension between the metrical shape and the melodic shape. Most musical phrases have a high point somewhere in the middle and not at the end. But metrically, there's a need for the last note to fall on the strongest beat. And the song does make that kind of clear. So one consideration is the shape of the melody. Fine. Again, this is higher than that, but this is a bigger note. That's not the case here. The rhythm is the same both times. But this is quite a long note, which gives it more weight. Semantically, or in terms of syntax, you will make me happy when skies are gray. Probably the main accent would fall here. In this line, it's pretty clear that the word love is the most important word. First, know is important, but you don't know why it's important until you hear that word. I suppose in this line, the word sunshine is the most important word. Please don't take my sunshine away. But I don't like that because it means you're ending on a very weak beat. But mainly I don't like it because it's inconsistent with the other lines. So the meter, as I've shown with these numbers, is quite regular, but we superimpose on it a melody and words that aren't quite so regular. It's like we all have pretty well the same skeleton, and nonetheless our faces all look different. That's not quite true, but you can think of it that way. Now, so the lowest level is the level of the quarter notes, and that's your time signature, but it doesn't tell you that much. But those ones have a hierarchy, and it's a hierarchy of 4. So if we take the red numbers, which I like better, yeah, when you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, hop, 2, 3, 4, like in the army, very clearly the 3 is the secondary accent and the 1 is the primary accent. So we start with 2, 3, 4, 1 on the level of the whole notes. It's 2, 3, 4, 1, you see? And if you take all these ones which come in this measure, all these red ones, which is the most important? Where's the climax of the song? Is the
Love.
climax the last note? No, I don't think so, eh? Love, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's sort of the punch, well, it's not the punchline, but it's the climax of the song. And it's the climax of the words, too. And then, if you call that okay, I didn't do that in the largest ones. 2, 3, 4, 1. The words do that, but the meter doesn't. The meter makes the last note the most important. It's also the difference between masculine and feminine endings. A masculine ending is a single note, here and here. A feminine ending is weaker because there are 2 notes, and the last note is not on a strong beat. So metrically, in terms of accents, this has to be the strongest one. And it sort of wraps up the whole words too, I suppose. You never know how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. That sort of sums it all up. But the point being then that we have 2, 3, 4, 1 on the quarter note level, 2, 3, 4, 1 on the whole note level, 2, 3, 4, 1 on the quadruple on four whole notes or the whole line. See what I mean? If it's a square crystal on one size, it's a square crystal on all sizes. And yes, music is not so clear cut and dry. If it were, it would be boring. But it does have this substructure, which is like the skeleton of an animal or a human being. So this is an example of a song that is quite regular, quite symmetrical, quite predictable. The only thing that comes as a surprise is the last line. You could say that's the punchline. You're expecting the last line to start on the second count like all the rest of them, and it doesn't. It also has a rhythm here that you didn't see before. So I think that qualifies as a punchline. And this is a stronger ending musically. They're both on the same chord. But here we're on the third of the chord. We're on the root of the chord. That's a stronger ending. And any classical melody has to end on Do. And everybody understands at this point that we're not on Do yet, so the piece can't be over yet. Okay, then that brings us to Scarborough Fair. There, that's the one I wanted. This one is quite interesting. I thought I'd throw this in, and I usually didn't get to this one until about the third or fourth workshop week, because it's more complicated than You Are My Sunshine. Okay, maybe I should start by singing it, and so you know which version I'm using here. In fact, I am going to go to the last page. I worked out an accompaniment. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She was once a true love of mine. Okay. And I'll explain why I put an intro and an interlude in. And that postlude there is the same as the prelude. It could also be the interlude if there were more verses. I never did bother checking if, I'm sure there are other words. Most of these songs have lots of verses. Now, what's interesting about this one, if you try counting with your fingers, are you going to Scarborough Fair? That's not 4 fingers, that's 5 fingers. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Oh, the next line isn't 5 fingers, it's 4 fingers. Remember me to one who lives there. Now, Paul Simon, when he does this, puts an extra bar of 3/4 time in at this point. I've seen it in books without that, where they just go, remember me to one who lives there. She was once. And I've often wondered, why does Paul Simon do that? I'm going to explain that now. So we had 5, 4, 5, 4. You see the symmetry?
Yeah.
And this is very similar, much more common than this, is an alternation of 4 and 3. Probably the most notoriously best known example of that is Amazing Grace. Do, 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 do. Dum ba da 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 1 da da 2 da 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 4 dum ba da da dum bum ba. That's only 3 fingers. And to maintain the symmetry of the song, you do an extra bar and just hold it. But I can show you all kinds of hymn books where Amazing Grace only has 3 bars in the second phrase, and it goes like this: dum 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 bum 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 ba dum ba da dum bum ba, and that bothers me. Does it bother you?
Yes.
You've destroyed the symmetry of it. But it happens all the time. People sing songs like this unaccompanied. If there's no accompaniment ticking away, music tick, they get bored and they just go on to the next part. And then
Question.
Yeah.
So can you clarify what you mean by the numbers when you're talking about counting? Because I don't understand why you're saying there's 5. Like when I'm hearing this, it sounds like it's in 3. Like the entire song sounds like it's in 3.
Scarborough Fair. Yes, it is in the time signature. There you have it. But
What do you mean then, when you're saying you're counting? Like, what are you counting? That's 5 and 4.
well, if you write it in 3/4 time, which is how you usually see it, I'm counting the measures now. You see, the meter doesn't just exist on the level of the time signature. Yes, the time signature says 3/4 time. The 1 is the most known count, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 until the song is over. But there's more to it than that. That's just, and incidentally, the magic number is usually 4, which is 2 plus 2. But here is one level where the time you're not using 4 fingers or 2 fingers, but 3 fingers. 1, 2, 3. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Yeah.
Yeah.
That stays the same. That's rigid. Although I didn't play it rigidly, you might have noticed my rubato. But that's the time signature. You could say that's not the lowest level. The lowest level would be the 8th notes. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? And Paul Simon does something like that on his guitar. He does 8th notes. And that is, those quarter notes don't divide into 3/8 notes, they divide into 2/8 notes. So at most levels, when you're counting with your fingers, and you could even go, are you going to, and you did 16th notes, they would come in 4s.
That's the Philip Glass version.
Yeah, maybe. So there is one layer in 3s, and in most songs the next higher layer will be in 4s, but not in this one. It's in alternating 5s and 4s, and those are the red numbers, eh? Does that clarify that, Nayar?
So the numbers in red, there's a higher order of organization.
The higher order is the larger and larger units until you have a series of just 4 numbers that describe the whole piece. And then you experience it the way Mozart does. You're comparing that with that, 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 all at once. It's a hierarchy. Every note, every beat has its position in the hierarchy. If you have 5 sons, you don't say number 1 son, number 2 son, number 3 son. No, each one has its own personality. So the next level is these red numbers. Now, the obvious thing is to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's saying, well, the main accent is on the first note. And you can interpret the piece that way, and that's what I did here. In this analysis here, which I did earlier, I showed 4 different ways of counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? And if you do that, you'll notice that the primary accent is on R and the secondary accent is on Scarborough. And you can continue that all the way through. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. 5 is 2 plus 3 in this line. It's 3 plus 2 in this line. That's interesting, I think. She was once a true love of mine. And that's a possible interpretation of it. But I'm saying it's okay when you're listening to whatever you're listening to and you're counting with your fingers and you just start with your first finger. That's okay. And then once you've done that for a while, you ask yourself, is it starting on the strongest beat? And if not, where's the strongest beat? And so then you try, let's make the last one, the last word, the strongest beat. That's the green numbers. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She was once a true love of mine. And notice some inconsistency in that. But if we do the fives like that, then you could maybe say that the primary accent, if it's on fair, are you going to Scarborough Fair? The secondary accent might be here. Parsley, sage. The secondary accent would be here for sure, and then the primary accent here. So that would be the green version. The blue version would be, you decide that at the beginning going is the most important downbeat. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? And then fair would be the secondary accent. Parsley, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She was once a true love of mine. And then we have some problems with fitting it all together, which I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can sort of see that. And then the red numbers, I decided was my favorite. And that's what I did in the next page, is to make scar. And why? Because remember me to one who lives there. The one. That one is the most important character in this story. Why? Because she was my true love. See? She was once what? That's, until you get to there, the sentence hasn't made sense yet. Even parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, well, that's the last of the four spices, sort of automatically it becomes the important one. So and that means we've chosen the red possibility, which allows us to go to the next page, which I just sort of did again without the distraction of the other colors. Now, so the ones, as you can see, line up. Again, you can imagine me folding this over and folding it over until all the ones come on top of each other. And then I'm hearing it the way Mozart would have heard it. And again, like in You Are My Sunshine, having established the hierarchy from downbeat to downbeat to downbeat, now we have to compare these four main downbeats. And I discovered that I couldn't do that satisfactorily without putting in an extra. You see, if you do this song and then repeat, how long do you wait before you do the next verse? You can't do that after 3 beats. She was once a true love of mine. Bum, bum, bum. Nobody's going to do that. And Paul Simon definitely doesn't do that. I should listen to it, how much of an interlude he puts. But I guess I didn't get around to doing that. But you need something. And what I came up with then was this. I composed this little interlude and discovered it needed that many counts, that many bars to sound satisfactory. She was once a true love of mine. If I had fewer bars than that, it wouldn't sound satisfactory, I think. I could do 1 bar less. Down, bum, bum. suppose I could have done that. But because there's so many asymmetrical phrases of 5 downbeats in this song, I wanted 5 downbeats in the postlude too. Do you see what I mean? That's the charm of the song. One of the main reasons people love this song, beginners get bored with so many songs in a major key, and when they finally get to do one that's not in a major key, they love it. It's not even in a minor key, it's in the Dorian mode, which we don't need to talk about now. And the other thing, however, that people find so charming about this song is its charming asymmetry. And I think I've shown now what does that consist of. It's those lines of 5 downbeats. And so look at it this way. Five, these are 5, this one doesn't count. This is 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5. 5, 5. So we have 5, 4, 5, 4, and the connecting one is 5. And if I just do one verse with a prelude and a postlude, it's 5, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5. It's a palindrome if I leave this one out, and then it's 5, 4, 5, 4, 5. There's a symmetry to that too. And then you can look at, okay, to what extent, what about the words? Do they support these red numbers? Are you going to Scarborough Fair? That makes sense. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She was once a true love of mine. The meanings of the words, the poetry is, if I just read it as a poem, it's quite asymmetric. It's not a poem that could ever be recited by a poet at a poetry gathering. It only makes sense as a song, really. But that sort of fits. And let's look at the shape of the melody. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Well, the high note is here. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Okay, so there's a tension between the shape of the melody and the metrical shape. In terms of words, I think Scarborough is more important than going. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. So we could say that in terms of the melodic shape, now the beginning is the high point. Remember. So in this line and in this line, the high point of the melody comes at the beginning. She was once a true love of mine, and it comes very near the beginning. That comes on the word was. All of these phrases tend to start high and then work their way down. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She was, that's the high punch. She was once a true love of mine. The rest of them are low. That's the shape of the melody. It contradicts to some extent the metrical shape. It contradicts to some extent the words. That's part of what makes the music interesting, of course. Also part of the charm of the song. Rhythm. Are you going? The Scotch snap here that Paul Simon uses, or is it Garfunkel that does the singing? I think Garfunkel just did the word. I don't know what he did. It's interesting. A Scotch snap is interesting rhythmically. It creates an accent. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? A dotted rhythm here is not, it's more classical, more boring. But you can also think of going as being a 2-syllable word. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Then the most interesting rhythm actually does come right here. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. This is the only point where we hear the sixth note of the scale, which makes it Dorian. Parsley, sage, rosemary. That G there, if it was Aeolian, parsley, sage, rosemary, and it would be that. So, and you can't really predict that. If I do the A flat chord here, there's an E flat in that chord. That would be consistent. So when the G natural comes, it's a surprise. Which, of course, puts quite an accent there, but metrically, that's not a metrical accent. But it is nice when the melody it goes up onto that note. If they had done that, it wouldn't have stuck out as much. And the Scotch snap really draws your attention to it.
Reinhard, can you explain that Scotch snap?
Well, without the Scotch snap, just quarter notes. Dotted rhythm, like green sleeves. But it's much nicer with the Scotch snap, so that the second note is not late but early. Yeah? That's called a Scotch snap. It can be thought of as a form of syncopation too. And when I performed it the first time, I actually dwelled on that. I slowed down the rhythm. I'll do it again at the end. And so we have the main downbeat here on the word time. What makes it? Well, it's long. Well, it's the same length as this, really. So again, the rhythmic shape is not the same as the metrical shape. And there's that tension between them, the different ways of looking at it. The harmony is interesting. The interesting harmony is right here. It contradicts the metrical shape. 5 is not an important count when you're counting. This line, the harmony as it's usually done, remember me to one who lives there. You would have 2 D flat chords and then an A flat chord for 2 more bars, which would create an accent here and here. Remember me to one who lives there. And that's there. All these possible interpretations are there at the same time. And a sensitive performer shows that ambiguity and is aware of the possibilities, mostly unconsciously, I must say. But when I decided to give it a chord chart, I decided if this is going to be the main downbeat, we need an interesting chord here. And it's interesting because it goes against the G natural that we had here. A G flat chord really contradicts that. Remember me to one who lives there. Quite dissonant. To one who lives there. She, which creates a nice climax for the whole song. It's the most dissonant point in the whole song, which thereby I justified the big red numbers being 4, 5, 1, 2. And since we have 5 lines and this dominant thing seems to be not 4s but 5s, I added that postlude. Now, when you have four, let me finish with the harmonies. The fourth line does the same thing. Normally, she was once a true love of mine. We just have A, B flat going to A flat, staying on A flat, going back to B flat. So once and mine would be the main accents. But I changed that so there'd be an interesting chord right here to outline it. So instead of she was once a true love of mine, I changed it to she was once a true love of mine. So I chose harmonies to underline what I thought was the metrical structure. So when you take these things in, when you have 4 or 5 counts, there's always going to be a primary and a secondary accent. And that's what the numbers in green squares are talking about. And I've talked about that already. That's pretty obvious. And even in the postlude. I wrote a little diddle there that would underscore that. Now, we need the highest level, the highest hierarchy. So I decided that the climax of the song was going to be here. And that's why I put that very dissonant chord there. Because I mean, when you just think of what the story the words are telling, remember me to one who lives there. That one person is the most important thing in the story. The last line, the reality of that past love of his, it's just a memory now. It's just an echo. See what I mean? So I think in terms of the meaning of the words, I'm justified in putting the main downbeat here in this line. And so when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the primary accent, of course, is 1. But is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? What is it? I think in this case, if we are going through and we're going to do a second verse, then I'd say it's 3 plus 2. If this is the main downbeat, this is not the secondary accent. This is just the, or it could be because it's the last thing in the postlude. You could think of it that way. Again, you can choose. Is that more important or is that more important? Is 4 more important or 3 more important? You have both possibilities when you have a group of 5. But definitely this is the climax, and what I learned in high school, this is the denouement, where you wind down from the climax. And most music does that. Most music has its high point, not right at the end, but about 3/4 or 2/3 of the way through. That is pretty well the points I wanted to make there. Well, any questions about that before I sing it for you one last time? Well, so for my sign-off song, I'll just do it again. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? And I'll start again and see if you can notice my rubato. You will not hear Paul Simon doing that kind of thing. Okay? Pop music is generally in a rigid beat.
Sorry, and then rubato is what?
Well, pop music is almost always has a fairly rigid beat or a very rigid beat, which is why you can accompany it with automatic accompaniments on electronic keyboards. It works.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't work for classical music. And I'm giving it a classical approach, mostly by speeding up and slowing down. Okay.
Yeah, I did notice that. I didn't notice that. I didn't know that was called rubato. Okay, yeah, I did notice it for
Yeah.
sure.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there.